Okay, may I welcome everyone back this morning, and delighted to have Derek Yock with us this morning, who was not was doing other things, otherwise engaged yesterday. And maybe we want to hear from you later, Derek, a little bit of, I'm sure people would be interested in the sort of update on the WEF related activities yesterday. Global Compact, excuse me. So I want to, we're going to just want to give you a bit of an overview of what we plan to do this morning. We're going to move ahead with the program as planned. Unfortunately, as often happens when one hopes to get elected officials or ambassadors, they're become otherwise engaged at the last minute, so we're delighted to have our Norwegian colleague here. Unfortunately, the ambassador from Colombia is not able to leave the country. Actually, I think it's in Cuba, it seems. And our Kenyan colleague had to cancel out a few days ago, so we're delighted to have you. Appreciate your coming, and look forward to the conversation that Simon Bland will facilitate and have an opportunity for questions and answers. Then we'll move into Lou Valdez's session on regulation. And then we'll take a break. And before we begin the working group on the framework, we'll sort of turn off the cameras. We'll invite anyone who's here as a member of the public to be involved, but try to sort of function more as an actual real-time working group as we sort of take up the framework. At that point, Renuka and I will give our sort of takeaways from yesterday as a sort of warm-up, and then we'll really work on moving through documents at the last item that's in your book that we hope would prepare for part 2 of this work in the fall. Does that sound all right with everybody? So we may end a little early, but I don't want to say that, so don't change your plane reservations. We'll keep working. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Simon Bland. He has been a really indispensable member of this group since it began, and he joined UNAIDS in August 2013 and is their director here in New York. As he mentioned yesterday, I think before joining UNAIDS, he was a senior civil servant in the UK Department of International Development, and has represented the UK on the boards of the Global Fund, Tuberculosis, Gavi, UNITAD, and the Global Partnership for Education, and we're delighted to have him facilitating our first session.
Thanks, Joe, and good morning, everybody. And Gail, welcome. Thanks very much for making time to be here. I just wanted to say a few words by way of introduction and reflection. The first is to say I'm going to resist all temptations to relabel this session a learning event for the UK and what it can learn from Norway in dealing with Europe after quite a shock last night. That's all my emails have been this morning. But the day before yesterday, I went down to the General Assembly Hall. A big, imposing hall to look at the opening of the Global Compact Leaders Summit. And the hall was full of young entrepreneurs, students, academics, for a session that was opened by Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General, facilitated by a Ghanaian British journalist, and the excitement in the room was pretty palpable. You don't always see that in that hall. It's a place where you have state-to-state government negotiations. Occasionally you have great euphoria. The adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals was certainly one of those. But that excitement and that buzz is pretty unusual. But it's a definite trend. It's an absolute trend of greater inclusion and greater trust. It's not without still some considerable political battles around the role of civil society and the role of the private sector, and we've talked a bit about that over the last couple of days. But it's something that I think is very encouraging. Gone are the days where it is just a closed room of state talking to state, and we're seeing this approach to multiple actors. David Nabarro yesterday, in his sort of personal narrative of where he'd come from, talked about the global goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, as a political manifesto for people and planet. And we hear the expression, there is no plan B and there is no planet B. The breadth and scope and ambition of this agenda really means that they are goals for everyone, but they are goals that will need everyone, and we need to make these goals personal. And Lisa Kingo at the Global Compact dinner last night talked about the need for leaders that care and leaders that dare. And we heard yesterday some great examples of leadership within corporations, of how they're moving corporations in a way of having shared value creation and businesses that are good for society and the environment. But we know that progress will be driven at the national and local levels. So this session was really included in the agenda to listen to a little bit of that perspective. As Joe said, we had apologies from Ambassador Maria Meja of Colombia, a strong champion of the SDGs from day one, a strong champion for a woman Secretary General, but also a strong champion for the peace accord in Colombia. And she was in Cuba to be part of the signing of that peace agreement with FARC. So if we're going to lose an ambassador for an event, I feel quite comfortable saying, please, Ambassador, absolutely, that is crucially important. But she did want to know how, you all to know how important she sees this agenda, and sent her apologies. I just wanted to say a word about universality, as David mentioned yesterday. He talked about how those talks in Rio were stalling because of that debate around the old North-South agenda, and many countries, the G77, saying, no, this is a different agenda, and you have to be accountable. These are goals for everyone. And they won the day on that argument. And I just wanted to use a couple of anecdotes from my perspective. Yesterday, you heard Jeff Blander talking about PEPFAR and the incredible work that the US is doing on fighting AIDS around the world. And he said his CEO, President Obama, has a goal of ending AIDS by 2030. Hey, well, guess what? We developed that goal, the UN developed that goal, the negotiations here developed that goal, and the president of this country has adopted that goal as his own, and I think that's quite remarkable. So that shows us something. But not only that goal for the world, I also had Congresswoman Barbara Lee from California visit me right after the adoption of the SDGs. Not to talk about America's role in PEPFAR, but to say, how can these help me in Oakland fighting a disease that's actually getting worse? So I think there are really positive signs that this is not an agenda that is just North-South, but is for everyone. It's patchy, there's a lot of work to do, but there are some really good signs. And here in New York, both state and city, working with Governor Cuomo and Bill de Blasio, there is a plan for New York State and city to end AIDS by 2020. Again, building on the UNAIDS fast-track strategy over the next 5 years. So just great examples that this isn't a North-South agenda. So I'm really delighted to welcome Ambassador Geir Peterson, the permanent representative from Norway to the United Nations, here today. I'm really looking forward to hearing from him how the SDGs are playing out in Norway, both at home and abroad. I need to let you know that the ambassador played a major leading role. 2015 wasn't only momentous for the SDGs and COP21 on climate, but in July, the world came together to talk about financing for development in Addis and adopted the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. And if we think some negotiations are really difficult, this was a really tough one. And it went down to the wire, and Ambassador Peterson with Ambassador Talbot from Guyana led that and facilitated that process and got an agreement in Addis. I happened to be sitting in a hotel having some drinks with some folks before they left, and Ambassador Peterson walked in with his team, having just had this signed, and they were pretty happy, I have to say. So it was a great moment, and it really did pave the way and the foundation for the Sustainable Development Goals. So with that, Ambassador, please, welcome.